right.
The
We are
Pacific is
live. Okay, so if you're watching this not live, look right below you. There's going to be a little marker that you can time jump to, like 5 to 10 minutes in. That's when I'm going to actually start the video. I let people trickle in when I'm doing it live because people will see it goes live and then they'll join, whatever. So just click that. Then I'll just hang out here for the time being. So what I'm going to be discussing today is a Masaman video, and Masaman is this guy who I've liked for a really, really long time. I've watched him for years and years and years. His name's Mason. He's got a touch of the tism, it seems like, in my wholly unprofessional opinion. And he talks about he has an incredibly deep understanding of genetics of people. He's mixed race of like 3 or 4 different things himself, and I think he talked about that as being an inspiration for it. And I don't he does go into the cultural anthropology a little bit because you kind of have to, but his concentration is on the genetic aspect, which is something that personally I don't know as much about. So I'm going to be going over a video of his today that he just came out with on the history and people of Oceania. And we're going to see if it's a good fit for reactions in the future, see how you guys like it. But yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of the people of Oceania, especially the Polynesians as the seafarers. I'm a big, big fan of them. So I am hoping it's going to be good. So again, I'm going to start in a few minutes. If you're watching later on YouTube, there's going to be a little thing down below for you to click on. That's weird. I'm not getting... Ooh, do I have the video unlisted? No. No, people just don't want to watch me right now. Maybe it's the time of day. I don't normally stream right now. No, there's one person here. That's odd. There's usually like 3 or 4 people jumping in immediately. But that's okay. I'll stream to one person. I'll stream to 4 people. I don't care. Got to get those reps in. So I'm going to start that in a little bit. I'm going to let people come in. If you're on Twitter, sorry. Just hold on for about 5 to 10 minutes. Got to give people a chance to start. Yeah, so the Pacific. You know what I'll do in the meantime? I'm going to look at a map of the Pacific. See if we can find an ethnic map of the Pacific Islands. Oh, here we go. This is perfect. So this is the most simplified one that you can get to. Micronesia here, Melanesia, and Polynesia. Melanesians, mostly New Guinea. That's the most populous island. This island's huge, way bigger than it looks. It's on a Mercator projection. And then Polynesia, which is the most interesting one to me. And I'm sure that Masaman is going to get into all the specifics, nitty gritties of the genetics that I can't do as well. So I'll just be talking about the cultural aspect of that because that's what I do. And he does what he does. And he's better than me at the genetics by a long shot. Right. So we are live. Cool. Okay, well, no one's here, but I don't care. Well, there might be someone on Twitter. They don't give us live statistics on Twitter anymore, which is super annoying. This is strange. Maybe it's because I didn't post it as much earlier before. Maybe everyone hates me now. Who knows? That's okay. I will stream to one person. Okay. Get a timestamp. No, I'm gonna grab one thing. Well, it looks like I am all out of Zins, which is a crying shame, but that's okay. We'll live without it. If someone's here, could you tell me if my audio is good? This is usually not a problem I have. It must be the time I'm streaming or something. Whatever. I'm going to try to do more streams, probably shorter. I streamed for like 3 hours the other day. I'd probably do it more often if I didn't commit to that crazy amount of time every time I did it. I guess I'll just get going. Maybe it's my title and everything. Whatever. It's all learning. Okay. Before I actually start, I'm just going to make sure because this is very, very odd. And if you're on Twitter, you're like, what the heck are you talking about? But yeah, usually people participate on YouTube. Yeah, no, it's fine. It's just nobody cares, I guess. That's all right. Okay. Put that timestamp in. All right. The history and people of Oceania, the Melanesians, Micronesians, and Polynesians. If you're in the comments, let me know how my audio is. I can check it on the soundboard, but it's not perfect.
It's quite large and quite scary, not only because of some of the bizarre creatures that are home to these islands and the seas around them, but due to the sheer scale and isolation of the Pacific, giving rise to some of the world's most divergent and unique life forms. Similar to a Peter Jackson movie, before a species first settled these deadly and exotic islands, there existed a whole
What movie is this? Is that Robert Downey Jr. being faced? Like, these are like black people mixed with orcs or something. What the hell?
host of humanoid species that look different, acted different, and were definitely built different than any humans we see alive today.
Okay, yeah. So he's talking about other human species. So we're Homo sapiens, of course, and then the other like Neanderthals and Homo florensis, they're still humans if you classify it by the anthropology definition. It's semantics.
Before we look at the modern people of the Pacific, we have to look at the very first inhabitants of this region, who were not, in fact, human beings as we understand them today. One of the first hominid species far predating anatomically modern humans in this region of the world were our hairier, primitive uncle, Homo erectus, whose previous territorial range stretched all the way across Eurasia and into the cusp of Oceania, a landmass that is today referred to as Sundaland. Sundaland was a large peninsula jutting out from.
Just so we're clear, Homo erectus is a human species. They're far enough along that they're a human species. I don't know if we could interbreed with them. Whatever.
Eastern
They're
Asia,
considered
encompassing the islands of Borneo, Sumatra, and Java, and was above water for millions of years.
Yeah, so this right here, I mean, these are the Indonesian islands. Again, this is along the equator or around here, so this looks much smaller than it actually is. These islands are absolutely massive, but all this land that's in these other, in this other color, like you should probably recognize the geography of what it is today. But look at this. This is a massive landmass. I should look up what the actual landmass of this is. But there's a lot of ancient lost civilization theories about this area specifically. Unfortunately, a famous example, which is Gunung Padang, which is a archaeological site that I've talked about before that Graham Hancock seems to not want to give up, but to me it does not look human. At least the Unit 4, which is the 26,000-year-old one, does not look human.
Years until the end of the last glacial maximum around 20,000 years ago. Before we begin, let's take a look at today's sponsor.
Let's not. Dude, how does he have 500,000 subscribers with like this
Nowadays,
quality?
first time any article be available. It's really been quite convenient. You can get it in this species, Floresiensis, really Denisovus. That time, feel free to check it out. Thank you all, and let's get back to the video. Before that time, a couple other hominids also came to call this region home. notably Denisovans, a species related to
Denisovans?
Neanderthal, and Homo floresiensis, or the
Homo
hobbit man, an
floresiensis.
exceptionally short hominid species,
Maybe
around
I
3 to
pronounced that
4
wrong.
feet tall for adults, resulting
Floresius?
from island dwarfism.
Island dwarfism. Oh, that's a thing that like hits all species. So, I mean, look at the skull. This is not a anatomically modern skull. It's small. Low skull, widest around the ears with a sloping forehead. Does not look robust to me.
A phenomenon that is
Wait, half the size of a Homo sapien female? I mean, jeez.
exhibited in a number of entirely unrelated modern human populations in the same region. The exact date and timeline for the extinction of these species is highly debatable, although some anthropologists originally believed Homo floresiensis survived well after the arrival of the first Homo sapien migration into Oceania. More recent analysis shows that they may have gone extinct very quickly after our species stumbled upon them,
I
and
wonder
possibly even
how.
before that, as no evidence of interbreeding has ever surfaced in modern or prehistoric human populations in the region, and it's unclear if this was even possible due to the massive discrepancy for our most recent common ancestor around 2 million years ago, limiting genetic compatibility. Long story short, they went
Whoa,
extinct
that
and
is
we
creepy, dude.
didn't, and the region of Sunderland was continuously inhabited by humans for at least the past 40 to 50,000 years, making them the oldest known branch of surviving anatomically modern humans to have branched off from Africa, and hence one of the most genetically distinct and diverse population of non-African humans. The first peoples to have inhabited the region of Sunderland were very distinct from the modern
These people are very, very dark. The Indonesians today are not. They're very light.
Southeast Asians who have spread to the region in successive waves. The exact nature of the relationship between the indigenous people of this region with the prehistoric
Okay. Jeez, this is the type of stuff that like I even have trouble with because I don't do this type of thing. Um okay, so these are Polynesian groups, Samoic, Tongic from Tonga, Samoic from Samoa, Rapa Nui, which is Easter Island. I don't know what that is. Marquesan, Tahitian, or Tahitic, I guess. Bora Bora. See, okay, so the purple here is Melanesian. These people are darker. I guess he's going to explain to us the specific differences in them. But those are the people that he just showed. I think were they look to me like Melanesian people. They could be something else. They could be Torres Strait or Islanders or Australians as well.
populations of Oceania and South Asia are still debated, although they're genetically somewhere in between the two. There isn't really a widely accepted modern term for the indigenous peoples here, as the Spaniards originally referred to them as negritos, meaning little black people, due to their diminutive stature. However, this is now considered pejorative and unacceptable.
Dude, I hate this. If you're in English and you consider a Spanish phrase pejorative, you're doing the offensive stuff that you're talking about. Like I've seen this before. There was a soccer player a few years ago in Latin America that called a black soccer player negrito. And this is if you hang out with Hispanic people, which I do. I love Hispanic people. It's a theme of the podcast at this point. Then you'll know that like you'll Bendito, Negrito, like anything Ito is just like it's a pet name type thing. It's not like a you're less than me pet name. Like you're not a sidekick or anything. It's a term of endearment. But freaking Anglo people hear the anything Negro like that. Like I'm not even allowed to say that anymore in the context, even though it's just Spanish for black. That's all it is. It's offensive, but I digress.
Acceptable by some. So for this video, I shall simply use the term Sundaic or Paleo-Sundaic to collectively refer
Using
to the
Negrito here
indigenous
would be
peoples
confusing to me.
of the former region of Sundaland. Interestingly, most of these Proto-Sundaic populations, as well as Oceanian groups further east, exhibit one of the highest degrees of archaic hominid admixture out of any group of
Oh, that's weird. So these types of maps, this is genetic variability between these different groups. So these are related groups. Up here, you have Taiwan. also known as the island of Formosa, where the Republic of China is now. That's their official name, Republic of China. And these Austronesian, these people are, well, the indigenous people of this area are Austronesian. Most of them are just Chinese now, but these must be Ami and Ataya. These must be like the indigenous people of Taiwan. And then you spread out from that, and you have the Polynesians in this area. Bougainville, that was a battle in World War II, as far as I know. New Ireland, what is that? New Britain, Connecticut. Okay. But these are these different populations, and the different shapes correspond with the different groups, and the different colors are groupings of people. And these are very interesting, and they're pretty intuitive and straightforward. But what we're seeing here is that this is the seed population, at least for the Polynesians. I hope he explains at some point where the differences in the Melanesians and the Micronesians come from, because I'm actually not sure.
The indigenous peoples of the former region of Sundaland. Interestingly, most of these Proto-Sundaic populations, as well as Oceanian groups further east, exhibit one of the highest degrees of archaic hominid admixture out of any group of humans in the world, nearly all from the Denisovans, ranging from 5 to 7% of the genome in most Papuan, Australian Aboriginal, and Aita peoples. And despite being a minority of the overall gene pool, this...
Okay, so I think these are percentages. So these different colors, they're corresponding. The black is down here with 0 of this early hominid that he's talking about, and then up till here, it's like, it's I guess that's 1%. I think that's 1% of DNA, and I think Europeans have like 1.7 average Neanderthal DNA, so it's not even that high. But we don't really know what specifically that is, because it's a spectrum, I guess. But you see the green having a little bit of it, the red in Papua, and up here, this is the Torres Strait Islands. And then whatever this is over here, these are the populations that have the early hominid admixture into their blood. And then the green over here, this comes from the Bering Strait land bridge and whatever other populations moving from Siberia over into the New World.
And Aita peoples, and despite being a minority of the overall gene pool, this Denisovan DNA has had profound impacts on their phenotypes. At the end of the last glacial maximum, tragedy befell Sundaland as a great flood swept across the land. Well, perhaps not a literal flood with the wall of water as is associated with supposed lost continents like Atlantis, but rather a gradual rising of sea levels due to the melting of polar glaciers that saw over half the land of Sundaland below water, creating the islands of maritime Southeast Asia.
Then why is there a flash frozen mammoth? Where did that come from?
Successive waves of
rapid pole shifts. We're not talking about it today, but it's a thing that's possible.
Migration from other regions of Asia in the past tens of thousands of years have fundamentally altered the genetic composition of this root race of humanity, and few full-blooded individuals remain in modern Southeast Asia, with one exception, as waves of migrants from East Asia, starting with...
Okay, so this is like the movement of the Austronesians that become the Polynesians. I mean, I guess they split off over here. This is the Philippines today. This is Taiwan. And then this population is related to the Polynesians, but it's thousands and thousands of years back.
Austroasiatic and later Austronesian tribes began to encroach further south into Southeast Asia. In the past 5 to 10,000 years, these Sundaic peoples began to lose more and more territory, fleeing.
So these are Malaysian people. See, they're a lot. They're not as dark as the Melanesians that I was looking at before. They're called Melanesians because they have a lot of melanin. They're very dark. And then these Malaysians, these guys look, there's somewhat of a spectrum in Malaysian and Indonesian, which are related peoples. Although like the Thais and Vietnamese tend to be a little bit lighter. It's interesting at the very least.
To the mountainous interiors of the Malay Peninsula and remote islands all across Southeast Asia. Their original languages became lost, and most of the so-called Negritos of Southeast Asia now speak either Austroasiatic or Austronesian languages, which have a large substratum from a previous long-lost family of languages indigenous to the region.
God, there's
The only
not.
group to have survived.
It's not like, even Native Americans. We knew so much less about this area of the world just based on like being in the West. I know not all of you are from the West, but anybody in Latin America, and I mean, most of my listeners are Anglosphere. I digress. UK, Canada, and the US, and then like I think Germany is like number 4. Where's Frenchie at? I haven't seen him in a while. He moved to Australia.
Virtually untouched by these waves of migration were the Andamanese. The Andaman Islands are situated a few hundred miles off the coast of mainland Southeast Asia and were even separated from Sundaland during the last glacial period. Modern genetic testing has shown the Andamanese to have genetic links to both Oceanian and ancient South Eurasian populations, albeit interestingly without the same level of Denisovan admixture observed in neighboring populations, showing that the modern Andamanese were likely the first to split off from the ancient Southern Eurasian gene pool and are descended directly from the very first humans to settle on the islands 50,000.
See, that's very interesting. That reminds me of Sardinia in Europe, as Sardinia and Basque Country as the pre-Indo-European populations that are mostly gone. I mean, even most of the first wave, which is like Celtic, is largely gone. And then the Denisovans, they stayed on mainland Asia, Eurasia. So they would have not reached down there. So before the Denisovans went into Asia, that implies that these people were already past that area and down there in the Indonesian islands.
Years ago. The origins of the fierce isolationism imposed by the native
Sentinelese
Andamanese against nearly all groups that attempted contact or settlement on their islands are today debated. Some suggest it may have been a cultural practice deeply ingrained into their society.
Okay, so he brought up the North Sentinel Islands. These people are often misunderstood. They're not uncontacted. They were contacted in like the 60s or 70s by the Indian government. The Indian government then stopped bringing them food after they had been bringing them food, and it caused some issues in their society. This is what happens when you bring resources into an area and then you cut off that resource flow, because they adjust to that new normal, and it creates a lot of issues. So no, the North Sentinelese Island people have decided not to interact with the outside world. They created some sort of thing. It's not entirely relevant now, but he's using them as images. So
a reaction to slave raids by Asians from the mainland, but whatever the reason, it has kept their culture and gene pool extremely isolated and, dare I say, pure from outside interference. As a result of thousands of years of expansion, conquest, and intermixing, the vast majority of Southeast Asians have varying degrees of this so-called Proto-Sundaic ancestry, which phenotypically distinguishes them from Northeast Asians, although of course this varies considerably by region, ethnic group, and individuals. Originating from Taiwan several thousand years ago, the Austronesians didn't just stop after settling nearly all of maritime Southeast Asia. They even spread as far as Madagascar off the coast of Africa, as well as
yeah, that's an interesting fact. Madagascar, which is off the coast of Africa, based on the currents and seafaring wasn't a thing down in that part of Africa. The first people to actually settle Madagascar, which I think was in around 1200, it's debated, but around 1200 AD, were Polynesians. But now the population is way more Africans because they migrated there.
Into the intimidating expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The first Austronesians to settle in the islands of the South Pacific 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, a region referred to as Near Oceania as opposed to Remote Oceania, are now called the Lapita culture. Modern genetic studies tend to agree with the direct dispersion hypothesis rather than a gradual migration, as DNA analysis has shown that the first members of the Lapita society in Vanuatu were almost completely unmixed with the neighboring Papuans, meaning they migrated directly from either Taiwan, Southeast Asia, or possibly through Micronesia to the north. Since then, their descendants have spread out to nearly every single island of Oceania, and these Austronesian migrations into the islands of the South Pacific gave rise to several modern groups, the Melanesians, Micronesians, and Polynesians, with a significant degree of overlap between them and outside groups in the current age. The term Melanesian, Australo-Melanesian, or
This big one is Papua New Guinea
Australoid is sometimes used to
or
refer
just New
to the
Guinea.
entire race of Oceanians, so lumping in Australian Aboriginals, Papuans, and Southeast Asian Negritos. However, in a more restricted definition, Melanesian is sometimes used for the Austronesian speaking peoples of Melanesia, which includes the natives of New Caledonia, Vanuatu, most of the Solomon Islands, and parts of Papua New Guinea. These are distinct from indigenous Papuans since they usually have a higher degree of East Asian admixture from the Lapita civilization, normally through the maternal line, which is likely how they came to speak Austronesian languages in the first place,
This is going way over
despite
my
being
head, man.
genetically closer to Papuans than other Oceanians. Fiji is a unique case, being a fusion of both Melanesian and Polynesian cultures, and is difficult to classify since their language is closer to Polynesian than other Melanesian languages. Micronesians inhabit the Micronesian Islands, stretching from Palau in the west, the Mariana Islands in the north, and Kiribati or Kiribati in the east, and these islands were settled in various waves, and because of this, some languages of Micronesia, such as Chamorro and Palauan, are more distantly related to other Micronesian languages, and some of these various islands have very heterogeneous cultural and genetic compositions. Outside
Dude, what is up with his pronunciation? I've never noticed this before. He said heterogeneous. Heterogeneous? Am I pronouncing that wrong?
of the traditional Micronesian realm today, there exist a handful of islands to the south that historically had Micronesian settlements, such as the western islands of Papua New Guinea or Mapia Atoll in Indonesia, while during the colonial period, due to overpopulation on the small islands and atolls of Micronesia, Micronesians were resettled by the British to various islands in Melanesia, such as Robbie Island and
There's a lot of bad stuff that went over there. This is where Bikini Atoll is, where they just nuked the island, and then the people from that island they like put the image on their map. Yeah, some bad stuff.
Fiji, or Wagina Island in the Solomons, both of which have a Micronesian majority today. Additionally, British officials wished to resettle Micronesians from the overcrowded Gilbert Islands to the Phoenix and Line Islands to the east, which had been uninhabited for centuries due to their isolation and other unfavorable geographic features. And although the Phoenix Island settlements largely failed, Christmas Island, or Christmas in the Line Islands, was a success and is now home to nearly 10% of Kiribati's population. There were also attempts to settle Hawaiians on the Line Islands by the US government, however, these unanimously failed due to the outbreak of World War II. What's
I think a big part of that is, well, they couldn't have moved them in when the Japanese were rolling through and doing what the Imperial Japanese did. But the Polynesians were, you know what? I'm not even gonna get into it. That's unrelated.
truly interesting is that the indigenous name used by Polynesians to refer to Polynesia is Polynesia in Hawaiian or Polynesia in Tahitian, and yet these names predate the word Polynesia, whose etymology is derived from Greek and wasn't coined until the 18th century by French explorer Charles de Brosse. Aptly named due to the fact that it has the most dispersed and numerous territories in Oceania, stretching from Hawaii in the north, Easter Island.
Yeah, I mean, the Polynesian culture is the one that's the seafarers. It's also where this comes from. Well, Tonga, specifically Tonga. Oh, this island's called Rapa, and this one's called Rapa Nui. I know Rapa Nui. Rapa Nui is Easter Island, but where is
Or Rapa Nui in the east, and New Zealand in the south, a region referred to as the Polynesian Triangle. Polynesians have the greatest degree of Eastern Eurasian admixture in Oceania, despite being the most geographic.
interesting? This is New Zealand down here. They only got there in about 1000 or 1200 AD. But they're the biggest islands that the Polynesians settled, besides Madagascar.
Removed from any part of Asia, and hence many have pointed out that it is illogical to group them together with other Oceanians who are far more genetically distinct. Oceanian admixture among Polynesians generally ranges from 20 to 40%, and there is a clear sex biased genetic ratio when looking at their maternal DNA, which is mostly Asian, and their paternal DNA, which is mostly Papuan.
Oh no. You know what that means.
Showing that the Polynesians arose mainly from miscegenation between native Papuan men and Austronesian women. Although it is still unclear
What happened to the Austronesian men? What'd you do?
whether this was through peaceful intermixing or violent conquest, this can partially be explained by the fact that most native Papuans are rather patriarchal and male-dominated, while many Austronesian groups are more matriarchal in their familial and societal structure by
I don't like these broad stroke comparisons of very different countries or very different cultures. I've said this before, but every culture has some things that are matriarchal, some patriarchal, but the terms themselves have a cultural bias built into them, in how you perceive what is patriarchal and what is matriarchal. So I just don't agree with that. I wouldn't give that a lot of credence.
Comparison, and hence modern Pacific Islanders have a combination of both of these cultures. There are numerous islands that are ethnically and culturally tied to Polynesia outside the traditional Polynesian triangle as well, scattered throughout nearly every country of Melanesia and parts of Micronesia. These are known as Polynesian outliers. Some of the more significant Polynesian outliers include Rennell Island, aka Mugaba, in the Solomons, and Uvia in New Caledonia, and some of these outliers have histories dating back thousands of years to the first Lapita arrivals, while others were settled more recently by Polynesian colonists from western Polynesian islands such as Tuvalu, Wallis and Futuna, and Samoa. Although each nation and arguably every island of Polynesia has a unique history and culture, the Polynesians are more or less united under the same pan-ethnic umbrella abroad, as most outsiders care little to learn about the nuances and history of the region. Various empires rose and fell in Polynesia and the Pacific over the past 1,000 years, particularly the Tongans and Samoans, who greatly expanded their influence to encompass massive swaths of the Pacific with the help of the maritime network of trade and communication, leading to cultural and familial connections between virtually every single island in the region. It has now been confirmed through genetic testing that Polynesians did indeed reach the Americas even before the Europeans did, as varying levels of Amerindian admixture in eastern Polynesian populations in the Marquesas Islands, Rapa Nui, and the Tuamotu Islands showed that they had intermixed with Native Americans from across the Pacific coasts of North and South America. Despite most of the world being largely unfamiliar with the Pacific Islands, they are very familiar with the rest of the world, as virtually every island of the South Pacific was colonized at one point or another by a foreign power during the colonial age, oftentimes from very far away. Interestingly, although Austronesians managed to discover and settle nearly every single island in near and remote Oceania, they never seem to have settled on the mainland of Australia, which is puzzling, but various South and Southeast Asian powers seem to be aware of the continent's existence and may have had a minor contribution to their culture and gene pools over the last several thousand years. The first nation to have established contact with the natives of Australia in modern recorded history may have been the Portuguese in the 16th century, although this credit is mostly given to the Dutch 2 centuries later. Beginning in the 1500s with the Spanish colonizations of the Philippines and neighboring Micronesian islands, the islands of the South Pacific gradually began to fall one by one to various colonial powers. For centuries, the natives of the Pacific Islands were kidnapped, tricked, or bamboozled into effectively working as slave labor.
What? Dude, you cannot use the word bamboozled for slavery. Am I crazy? Come on, man.
Labor, a practice known as blackbirding for various European empires and various overseas colonies, particularly the Spanish and the British. Although the British later outlawed this crime, it continued to be practiced covertly, possibly as recently as the early 20th century, and many Micronesian, Polynesian, and Filipino civilians were trafficked to Spanish America during the days of the Manila Galleon, and millions of Latin Americans have ancestry from them. It's important to recognize that contact with the Europeans and the outside world had alarmingly drastic effects on the local population, as within only a few centuries, the population of nearly all Oceania had been more than decimated, with the population dropping at a rate of nearly 90% on some islands, leading to the near extinction of many Pacific Island communities, a similar fate to what occurred to the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and this can be attributed to several factors. The first was disease, as the Pacific Islands ended up being en route for some pretty heavily trafficked global trade routes, bringing them in contact with diseases from all over the world to which they had no immunity, and this problem persisted.
So this is a little confusing to me because the Polynesians did have the same animals. I guess they wouldn't have had the same diseases, but they did have pigs and chickens and rats, and I think something else as well.
For several centuries. The second was the introduction of Western arms and technology, which saw massive civil conflict erupting across the Polynesian island.
Yeah, so this is something that's really common. It happened in the in Native America as well. The culture that exists is based on the technology that they have. So there's laws of warfare that exist based on the technology that they have at the current time, and then you introduce. Oh, the voice is a little bit too low. Okay, thanks for telling me. I don't know why that is. I have it on the same setting. Maybe that's better. So it's when you introduce these newer, better weapons into this population that has their warfare based around less deadly weapons, and it's a big jump because you're introducing, these manufactured guns, especially in Polynesia when it's much later. They're going to continue with their norms of warfare that they've had before, and oftentimes it's mass death, and that's happened in many places, many such cases, especially in a lot of Polynesian cultures are extremely warlike. The Maori specifically on that I can speak the most about on New Zealand, what's now New Zealand.
From Hawaii, Tahiti, Samoa, and especially New Zealand, where a raid by Maori warriors in the 19th century resulted in the genocide of the Moriori.
These people right here, these are Moriori people. These are the people that split off from the Maori, and then were subsequently genocided by the Maori, unfortunately. And you can find me talking about that more with Stone Age Herbalist on episode 42 of the Illegitimate Scholar podcast right here on this channel.
Maori warriors in the 19th century resulted in the genocide of the Moriori tribe of Chatham Island. The third was general abuse and brutality by various colonial powers, including pretty much all of them, from the aforementioned blackbirding by various parties to the reckless abandon of the British, French, and American governments, with several Pacific islands now left heavily
that's Bikini Atoll, I think,
irradiated and virtually uninhabitable due to the atomic bomb tests their governments conducted in the Cold War. And before that, the Pacific saw the literal enslavement of entire islands during the expansion of the Japanese Empire during World War II. Back when foreign islands were traded around like Pokemon cards, the Spanish took most of Micronesia, including the Mariana Islands. Polynesia and Melanesia were mostly divided between the British, French, and Germans, while the United States took Hawaii and Chile took Easter Island. Germany would later take Spain's Micronesian possessions, only to be lost to Japan after World War I. Imperial Japan attempted to settle these islands, with tens of thousands of Japanese civilians, largely Ryukyuans, settling in Micronesia, and later expanding to Southeast Asia and many other islands in the Pacific during the Second World War. But after being defeated, control of the Micronesian possessions passed on to the US, and nearly all Japanese settlers were expelled from the islands. But the mixed descendants of Japanese men and Micronesian women were allowed to remain, and they make up a substantial minority of many Micronesian islands, mostly being completely assimilated with the locals. Although most of Micronesia gained independence, they still remain an associate state of the U.S. to this day, and massive proportions of their citizens now reside in America, cementing the relationship between them. In the past few centuries, Oceania also went through a significant religious transformation as well, while the vast majority of islanders converted to either Protestantism, Catholicism, or increasingly Mormon churches.
See that? Yeah, this is the thing. Polynesians are it's full of Mormons. It's just super weird. What is this here? It says this, the freaking closed caption is blocking it. Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia. The Catholic, a lot of them. I know Samoans historically were Catholic. And we're gonna be talking about. I'm gonna do a stream on a '80s documentary that deals with Margaret Mead and her thesis coming of age in Samoa that is totally BS. It's just absolute lies. Not entirely her fault, but where's Mormon here? Yeah, Mormon in Polynesia. Okay, you know that Tua, the maybe not no no not Tua, the other Polynesian guy that got catfished by the trans woman.
Or the Baha'i faith.
He was
And
Mormon.
most islanders also incorporate some elements from their traditional mythology and animistic beliefs in their national holidays and religious and spiritual practices. During this time, Europeans migrated not only to Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii, which received the vast majority of European migrants to Oceania by far, but also to some of these smaller islands, such as New Caledonia, Fiji, Guam, Tahiti, and others. But over time, these small and isolated communities increasingly intermixed with the locals across the entire region of the South Pacific.
Oh my God, the mutiny on the Bounty. This is an insane, horrible story. He's just brushing past it, but holy crap, is that I'm not even gonna describe it. If you want to know what went on the mutiny of the Bounty, mutiny on the Bounty, look it up. It's all of the worst things of humanity in one small ship.
This process gave rise to an entirely new heterogeneous race in the South Pacific that never existed until this point, a group known broadly today as Euronesians, and today there are well over 1 million people worldwide of mixed European and Oceanian ancestry, although their exact ethnic heritage and predominant culture varies significant from community to community and island to
Oh my God, that's a great picture.
island, with a number of Pacific islands having a distinct Euronesian history.
Oh, that's interesting. White people.
The most famous of which is arguably the Pitcairn Islands, with Pitcairn Islanders later migrating en masse to Norfolk Island, closer to Australia and New Zealand. British and French authorities would later import large numbers of Asian migrant workers and political prisoners to their Pacific Island colonies, most notably in Fiji, where descendants of Indian migrants of various origins now number in the hundreds of thousands, and the Indo-Fijians have a unique culture and history among the Indian diaspora. Indonesians, mostly from Java, along with Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, and Korean workers, and some Arab prisoners were also brought by the French into Vanuatu and New Caledonia, and many other Pacific Islanders throughout Melanesia, Polynesia, and Micronesia have some recent Asian ancestry today, further adding to the genetic diversity and cultural heritage of the islands. Today, only central Polynesia is majority Polynesian, as due to heavy immigration to Hawaii and New Zealand, Polynesians are a minority in their homelands, and only 17 to 25% of individuals in the Polynesian Triangle are of Polynesian ancestry. Another factor leading to Polynesian depopulation was emigration, both forced and voluntary, as today over half of the native Hawaiian population lives in the mainland United States.
Notice Utah has quite a large population. I think that has something to do with the Mormons. Lots of them around Seattle as well. I spent some time up there, and there are a lot of Polynesians.
And around a third of the entire
Wait a minute. The north of Alaska? What the heck?
population lives in the mainland
It's like the
United
Arctic
States.
Circle.
And around a third of the entire population of the Polynesian Triangle now lives outside of the region, and nearly half of the population of Micronesia has also emigrated. The Pacific Islands currently have one of the highest emigration rates of any region in the world,
That's how culture
with
dies.
Hawaiians, Samoans, Tahitians, Tongans, Maori, Chamorro, Marshallese, and other Polynesians and Micronesians spreading out mainly to English-speaking countries around the Pacific, the mainland US, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Melanesians and Papuans have a far smaller but not insignificant diaspora, despite being the most numerous indigenous people in the South Pacific by far. Many Melanesian nations, whose populations are growing rapidly, are still plagued by poverty, domestic strife, and extreme ethnic friction, especially in the underdeveloped highlands region of New Guinea, one of the most ethno-linguistically diverse regions in the world, with hundreds of distinct languages and where hundreds of individuals lose their lives to ethnic and tribal conflict each year.
Thank you,
There
Manila.
have also been conflicts between the Indo-Fijians, European, and Indonesian settlers with the
I
indigenous
agree, Romans.
Papuans and Melanesians. West Papua, known in Indonesia as Irian Jaya, has a long connection with
So this part of this island, the island of Papua or the island of New Guinea, this is Papua New Guinea, which is its own country, and then this half is owned by Indonesia. This area over here, the western edge, is where the Asmat tribesmen, when I'm in my normal studio, the shield behind me is from them. They were one of the last like well-known cannibalistic groups. I think there's still a few of them, especially up in the highlands in the mountains of New Guinea. There's a big, it's a very diverse place. So there's a lot of different cultures, and they don't have, most of them don't have large carrying capacity. So there's distinct cultures of a few thousand people. But this is where Michael Rockefeller was probably eaten, in this western area.
neighboring Indonesian empires and is currently divided between several provinces within Indonesia, and millions of Austronesian settlers from across Indonesia have settled there, although there are strong elements within the indigenous people of New Caledonia and West Papua that are still vying for independence. For instance, there have been no less than 4 independence referendums held in New Caledonia in the past 40 years, with the majority of
France.
natives, or Kanaks, voting for independence, while the Europeans and Polynesians on the island mostly support staying a part of France. West Papua has also seen a long string of political and ethnic violence aimed at further autonomy, complete
That says I'm not monkey. What the hell is the context of that? And why is it in English? It's owned by Indonesia.
independence or unification
What?
with Papua New Guinea. The
I'm not monkey?
island of Bougainville is technically still a part of Papua New Guinea, despite being closer to the Solomon Islands, and has long vied for independence themselves, viewing the Papuan officials as exploiting the land and people of their island, and is
probably
set
right.
to gain independence sometime within the next several years, which will make it the world's newest country. It will certainly
Yeah,
be
that
very
always works
interesting
out
to
well.
see how things play out within the upcoming decades and how the nations and cultures of this region evolve and interact over time. Please let me know your thoughts on the history
And then these people look Maori to me.
and people groups of
Some sort of
Oceania
Polynesian.
and which region of the
Darker.
South Pacific you have the most interest in learning more about. I know this video is much longer
do.
than usual, but in reality, I didn't even scratch the surface of all the various historical events and modern cultural quirks.
All right, that's it for today. Check out the podcast. I got a new episode with Will Spencer, Renaissance Man. It's a really, really great one. I always say that, but it really is. Patreon's $2 to see everything early.